This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
We live in an era of unprecedented access to information, news, and media. But what happens when all that information leads you to suddenly realize you spent the majority of your childhood in a cult? Well, we can tell you. Join me, Jessica Goforth, and Kathleen Reynolds as we take you into the world of cult recovery after all the emotional, psychological, financial, and sexual abuse we experienced as part of Bill Gothard's Advanced Training Institute. On our podcast called Leaving the Village, we talk candidly about our journey out and interview other survivors whose experiences will boggle your mind. We also cover breaking news as scandals continue to rock the twisted world of IBLP. Subscribe to Leaving the Village today so you don't miss a single episode.
If they want to talk about restoration and rebuilding, well, guess what? It's expensive to restore a building, to rebuild a church, and you are the church. Hillsong has done damage and needs to pay for repairs. And they've had no problem paying out severance packages for bad pastors and hush money to keep victims silent. So they should have no problem paying to restore you, to rebuild me. I don't know how, but I think we should start submitting invoices to Hillsong, requesting tithes back, requesting coverage for therapy, requesting back pay for babysitting, for ghostwriting, for cleaning, for driving, for pastoring, for doing their jobs. Hillsong is filthy rich, and the filthy they deserve. They can keep that. But the rich, they need to give back.
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality.
Before we get into today's conversation, we have some exciting announcements to make. First, we've started a Patreon. If you enjoy what you hear from us and you'd like to support us, please visit patreon.com/fullmutuality to become a patron. As a patron, you'll get some exclusive content, access to occasional live recording sessions, and a whole bunch of other stuff we have planned. But please be patient with us as this is still a work in progress. We're so grateful that you're listening, so don't feel obligated to give, but if you feel like our content is something you want to support, we would obviously welcome whatever you're willing to give.
Our second announcement is that we have partnered with Jessica and Kathleen from the podcast Leaving the Village to create the Dauntless Media Collective. This collective is a network of podcasts created by and for ex-evangelicals and other cult survivors, providing content for people who are evolving beyond the beliefs that they were taught and are seeking to deconstruct and decolonize their faiths. We have a growing list of podcasts joining the network, so visit the website dauntless.fm to find more content like ours.
Well, now that the announcements are out of the way, I am so excited and pumped for this week's episode. The topic's going to be a bit heavy, some trigger warnings off the bat, spiritual abuse. If you haven't had a chance to check out the Hillsong expose that just dropped, it's called Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed. Go check that out. I guess if you want to listen to it after this podcast, we're not really going to spoil too much for you.
Right.
We kind of talk about, side stuff. And a lot of the stuff in the podcast has been breaking news already. You might already be aware.
But you can so speaking of the documentary, because we do talk about the documentary a few times in the podcast, but we don't give explicit, I don't recall us giving explicit instructions. So if you're wondering where you can watch it, it's on Discovery Plus in the US, and I think it might be available in Canada as well. It isn't.
We'll stick it in the show notes.
Yeah, so we'll stick a link in the show notes, but you can sign up for a free trial. I think it's 7 days. Totally worth it because, it's a free trial. So definitely go check out the documentary there. It
is a 3-hour-long expose. It is, get ready for it because it is quite intensive. And but it's an important documentary. I think most people have been playing these worship songs have been the backdrop to all of our evangelical churches. And I think it's important to know what's going on. So take the time to actually get informed and listen to that. And you will appreciate this episode all the more for the conversations that we're having about this whole topic.
Absolutely.
We're also going to be mentioning a Joshua Tree incident that happened as we talk about white supremacy in this episode. And inside the deconstruction spaces, we're also going to just go to our show notes. If you're not really sure and following where we're going with stuff, we tend to rabbit trail. That's how we roll. Just go into our show notes and we'll take you to the places to give you all the backdrops on everything so you can situate yourself into what we're talking about if you have no clue. With that all out of the way, we're going to drop you right into our conversation, but I should probably say that when we do our recording software, there's always a countdown at the beginning when we have our guests on, and it goes like 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so we're just going to start off giggling our heads off because it was like a flashback to Hillsong for both Janice and Nate. So without further ado, here you go.
Right?
Oh, man.
Welcome to church.
I know, right? Oh, jeez.
We were watching the videos you put out about Hillsong, the one you did about Giving Sunday.
That heart for this house thing, that killed me. So
Colonial Church, we were crying. It was, oh wow. You produce and write and do all your own stuff for that?
Yeah.
You're talented. You are
That's
talented.
incredible.
The stuff that you put together is phenomenal. Okay, before getting into the documentary, I had one complaint about the documentary. I'd love to hear what you thought of it because you were in it, but like after listening to so many of your things and seeing how just the stuff you've been listening to your podcast, hearing your stories, knowing how involved you were for how long, for how much information. I mean, your stuff focuses on Hillsong, not all of it, but part of it. You have your stuff dedicated to talking about that. I just thought you were, this is my one complaint about the documentary. I found overall was well done, but you were underutilized in this documentary. You sat pretty on a bench. I'm like, the fiery Janice that I've come to see from all of her stuff is missing from this. You're like some tame, quiet, like, yes, and this is where we walked around the corner, and this is, and I'm like, oh, you guys didn't ask her the meaty stuff. She's gone through some, and I guess that was one of the big things that I thought was
Honestly,
did you know what they were going to come up with? What was going to be?
I had no idea what the edit was going to be. I would say everyone was underutilized because I think I didn't even think about it for myself, but I was thinking about Noemi, and they had Noemi in there, and I'm like, they didn't even touch on anything to do with homosexuality or the church's stance on that, and that's like not her whole storyline, but that's what she was there to talk about, and so we didn't even really get any of that. So I'm like, so much just got left.
3 hours long, and they could only scratch the surface.
Yeah.
They left out so much and it's not like there was nothing in that 3 hour. There's lots of stuff about Hillsong. I was shocked that I had I know Nate went to Hillsong and he's been telling me his Hillsong story. But I didn't realize they were signing NDAs at this Bible college. There was wild stuff in there that I was like, what is going on? This is cultish. This is really deep.
Yeah. But I do want to give us a little on-ramp into the conversation. So our guest today is the Janice Lagata. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. I feel like this is an opportune moment. Quick trigger warning for everyone. I'm about to use a Bible verse, but us running into you and your content was really for such a time as this.
Well, it is an honor to come before the king.
Oh, God. All right,
we've just been diving right into your content lately, and I think I stumbled upon it through Joe Luhmann's stuff when she was dealing with a bunch of white nonsense with Joshua Tree, and I was like, what's going on with this story? And then I clicked through her she put all, if anyone's wondering what we're talking about, just go click Joe Luhmann's, she has it in her Instagram highlights. It's in one of them. I forget which one, but she does a good job of explaining what's happening, and you have done some great jobs on many podcasts of talking about that kind of stuff, about even in deconstruction circles, because that seems to be a theme of a lot of the stuff you're covering, but how that white supremacy culture that we have in evangelicalism is still lingering on. It's still, the nonsense is still there, and it needs to be looked at. And that was okay. I said that I was disappointed that the documentary was missing you in terms of all that you have to offer, but they didn't even touch on any of that in the inequality. Like you said, there was the homosexuality issue avoided. Right. There was that.
Right. And we talked about that. So I'm saying, so much got cut,
ended up on the cutting room floor. Yeah. So let's put our thoughts into kind of some categories, because people are probably like, wait, what documentary? What are you all talking about?
What's the Joshua thing? Where you guys are all over the place.
What's a Hillsong?
What's a Hillsong? So let's back up. Let's start off. So
Welcome
our podcast,
to our podcast of ADHD people rambling on. That's me and Nate.
So So let's start off. Janice, tell us a little bit about yourself, specifically in relationship to faith and religion. I kind of want to maybe give us a little bit of a narrative. So maybe some story time here. Your background.
How did you get sucked into the cult of Hillsong?
I was primed for Hillsong, right? Like what do I say? I was born in California, but born for New York. So grew up in California. Grew up in church, very Pentecostal, charismatic. Church starts at 10. When it ends,
oh yeah, I have Pentecostal roots. That's what.
Who knows?
Yep.
Small church. At the time, I would have said diverse. Like I grew up with a Black woman pastor. But if you go, a generation back, like all of our spiritual grandparents, Kenneth Copeland, Kenneth Hagin, like all of these, all these white villains white now, dudes. Right? Like all these old white men. So that's the lineage, spiritual lineage I came from. And we started using Hillsong music in, like late 90s.
Okay. I feel like most evangelical churches are so familiar with Hillsong, and that's why it's so fascinating. Because the spread that it had, even outside, my church wasn't Pentecostal. I grew up Pentecostal, but then in my adult life, I wasn't in a Pentecostal church at all. It wasn't charismatic, and we used everyone used Hillsong music. It was the worship music tracks to most evangelical churches. There's some that were, doing their own music and they were extra cool and making their own stuff, trying to replicate Hillsong, but right. that was a benchmark, like Hillsong music.
Yeah.
So when and how did you end up in New York?
So before New York, I was in Australia. So I went to the Bible college.
Was that the goal when you went to Australia, was to go to Hillsong college?
Absolutely. That was it. Because, I thought I was going to, live and die in California. Even going to Hillsong college, it was just supposed to be for a year, and then I was going to go back to California and, go back to my old church and do whatever. And then being at Hillsong for that first year, I knew I wanted to stay longer, and then I knew I could never go back to California. It was just I feel like you get into the Hillsong mold and that culture and the way of doing things, and it's I cannot go back to like I said, the services that could be 2, 3, 4 hours long, right, just the simple things this is 90 minutes, you're in and out, you know what you're gonna get. Things like that.
I was college is not really like a Bible college. They're not teaching you the Bible there. They're teaching you Hillsong indoctrination. They're teaching you, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Hillsong.
You don't have a degree when you come out of there either. It's you go be a pastor at Hillsong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
that's the best you could hope for, right?
Yeah.
Like most of the people that I was friends with who came from Hillsong College, they were not like the highest leadership ranks, quote unquote, that they were reaching were, team leader for, the sound engineering team, or, right. Connect group leader, or leader of Connect group leaders. They weren't on paid staff. Some of them might have been, but they were low-level staff members who were getting eaten up by the
you
by
guys
the pastors.
Both were at Hillsong, both of you, and none of you were on paid staff, correct?
No.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a thing with Hillsong. For people who are listening or starting to get into understanding Hillsong, one of the big things, and I think the documentary did a good job of touching on this, is the exploitation of volunteers.
Absolutely.
We're jumping all over the place, but what was your involvement in terms of serving at Hillsong? What was your all the free labor, all the
free labor. So coming out of the college as a success story.
Oh yeah, how'd you get from one to the other, and then you were doing what?
Right. So as part of my service volunteering in college, was being part of the stage managing team. So then when the campus started in New York, they needed a stage manager. So I went straight to the top of that team. That was my, leading the stage managing team. So that was my first.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt, but if people are unaware of stage managing, what does that look like for somebody who's not aware of the production side of things, live show production, or the Hillsong world?
Mm-hmm. So live show production, stage managing is a legit job what we were doing. I mean, we were mostly babysitting pastors before they go on stage and when they come off. And moving things on and off the stage, to bringing the pulpit out, taking it back, setting up the merch, the things they're going to show during the announcements, making sure they have whatever the seat drops and things are, making sure they have a water bottle before they go on, making sure the water bottle that they have on stage, that the top is unscrewed, like not all the way off, but
That's
it's unscrewed.
super important.
Because it's hard for them, you know.
You don't want to break a nail before. That'd be distressing before getting on stage. You know, it'd be distracting me from talking about the Lord.
God forbid you hear a water bottle go click, click, click when it...
Take everyone out of the moment. You guys have prepped everyone in worship, so like you gotta keep that going.
So that's the thing. You're easing the way for the pastors. You can ease the way for the Spirit, you know, so all things can flow. So that was how I had any contact with Carl Lentz and how I got to know him, because I think
you were there from day one, right? Of like the launch of Hillsong NYC, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I was there before the Lentzes.
Before they even came in, before it was even technically a Hillsong. Did you know that it was might become one, or when you jumped into that group, or
when I joined? I mean, I knew Reed Bogard, who we now know is all types of villainous. I knew he was one of Brian's boys, and so I knew it would be Hillsong-ish, Hillsong affiliated,
adjacent or related,
yeah,
or
at least, and then. Because we joined their Connect group in like December, and then we know the Hillsong calendar, so we knew Vision Sunday was coming up, so we watched Vision Sunday, and that was when they announced, oh, there's going to be Hillsong New York, and as soon as they said they were coming to New York, I was like, oh, I bet this is going to be that.
And it started off something exciting for you, right? Like you were pumped to be a part of this. They're having Hillsong now in New York City. I just moved there.
I was in it to win it, and like. Yeah, these things you look back on now and you're like, oh, first of all, the nerve of you literally just moved to New York, and now you're going to join this church that is coming to New York. For what? Like, people already live here. People, like, none of these people are from New York, but we're coming in and we're bringing God to this city.
Yeah.
Specific brand of God, right? Like, Hillsong is supposed. But I mean, the hype at that time, I feel like, you know, we look at it now in hindsight, and we can see all the disaster that's coming out. But like back then, I feel like a lot of people would just, I mean, unassuming, right? People who joined, who volunteered, who gave their time, they were like, this is a place that loves God. The music is really good. This is like, you know, nobody went in there thinking this is super unhealthy and horrible, and like it's, you know, you're going to come out the other side super damaged from all of this. No one...
Right. No one was in there like, I want to be in the documentary.
Yeah. Just give it a couple years and wait to see what comes out the other side of this. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, how long into it, where did things start to like just fall apart for you? How did that come about?
I mean, honestly, there were issues from day one. I mean,
what was the most stark thing right off the get-go where you're like, ooh.
So right off the get-go, I think before Carl and Laura even came, like it's bizarre. And sometimes I think about things and the way they happen, and I'm like, I feel like I'm making this up because these things are so almost like cartoonish. You're like, that couldn't have.
You have to talk to someone else was there and like, you remember that, right? Like, and they're like, yeah, and you're like, okay, we didn't imagine that. That was really that crazy.
Yeah. So me and my friend Ajane, she had come back from college earlier, but she was in New York, so we moved to the city at the same time, joined the Connect group at the same time. So she's my confirmation for this. I'm like, that happened, right? But like Reed and Jess, when it was their Connect group, and it's like they're building their little thing, and some of us knew they're from Hillsong, but like most people didn't have it. So they legit were having to do real work, you know, to attract people, to hold people. So just super, super friendly and like reaching out and how's your week and how can we help and blah, 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 whatever. And so Jess had not gotten me a job, but like gotten me an interview with the company she worked for. So Jess Bogard and I worked together for a little while, like in the secular world. And I remember our boss she was going to be away for a week. And like I would usually come in at 9 and the boss would come in at 10. But because she was going to be gone, I was going to be like covering the end of the day. So I was going to come in at 10. And so me and the boss talked about this, decided this, and Jess just wasn't in that conversation because why would she be? Like, none of her business. So I come in at 10 when I'm supposed to, and Jess is like, oh, like, you're late. What's going on? I'm like, no, I'm not late. Like, we talked about, whatever. So, and then I tweeted, I was like, oh, don't you just love, like, when you come to work and get in trouble for something you didn't do? No names, no nothing, no whatever. And at the end of the day, Jess was like, oh, can we grab coffee? Can we,
Oh, no.
Oh, boy.
This is like code in evangelical culture. Can we go out for coffee? No, it's a trap. Don't go.
Right. So this is like the switch had just been made. Like, this is going to be a Hillsong, whatever. So we go to coffee and she's like, that was very, it's very dishonoring. You shouldn't have tweeted that.
Wow.
Whatever.
Dishonoring.
And so I'm like
she's a queen or something. You honored
right.
it. Okay.
I'm like, there were no
names.
There were no names. There were no anything. And this is my vibe. This is what I do. Like, I am who I am, and I have been. Like, I don't. This. So I was just kind of pushing back, and then she was like, whenever whoever the new leadership comes for this new church, I'm still gonna be your leader. Like it was just this idea that
there's like a power structure hierarchy.
Just power, like immediately. And like as soon as it became Hillsong, like there were no more. It was clear, like this hierarchy is in place. There's no more calls. There's no more reaching out. There's no more, like that just ended. Wow. And it was just immediately like, no, this is Hillsong. We are your leaders. Here are the rules. And, this is how it's going to go. And so even me kind of connecting with Carl was like an irritation to her. Because I kind of from that point on, I was like on her bad list. So she would have never wanted us to like connect. And I remember.
Is she the one in one of your stories that stood in between you and let you know they're busy? Don't go talk to them. But like not realizing you knew Carl Lentz's mom from Bible school and went to go. She's the one who ended up calling you over and putting egg on the face of. Yep. That was exactly. She was the one who decided to like step in and be like, nope, you can't go past.
You can't go past.
Here's the important people behind this wall, and I get to decide who's allowed.
Yeah. So things like that from like, again, day one, these things were in place, but kind of like how we did in Bible college, right? When there would be issues and we would always just assume the best of the people, like right above the people right above us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, okay, Jess and Reed are like this.
A little off. They've got issues.
But Carl and Laura, they don't know. They don't know that they're like this. And I'm sure they would be different. Like these walls that are being put up, that's not them.
There's always a few bad apples, and then there's a few more bad apples, and then you realize, oh my gosh, it's like a whole train, like the whole thing. The trees run, the roots are like it's bearing the fruits of the roots.
Right.
It's like the cops, right? There's one bad cop.
Right.
But
and we say that saying all the time, and we forget the rest of it. Right? It's just one bad apple, and you're like, but finish the saying. One bad apple spoils the whole bunch.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's usually there's the systemic stuff that's going on that's creating like what people are seeing. It's not coming out of thin air. It's not coming. Me and Nate were having this conversation because like I was like, well, do you think New York, when the Carl Lentz stuff broke, I'm like, do you think it's a New York situation? Like it's a New York culture, celebrity culture thing? And he's like, no, this is from Brian Houston's sort of model, and like this is the style of. But
you know what? So I said that when the Carl Lentz stuff dropped, but in 2017, I wouldn't have said that. Even though I walked away, I don't think my brain was ready to really acknowledge the fact that it was systemic. I was just sitting there going, the people that I'm in direct contact with, aside from the ones that I had become close friends with, which is hard to do in that environment, but there were a few people that I was able to do that with. But a lot of the people who were directly above me were problematic, and I couldn't get around them, and no one else was listening to me. But I kind of just chalked it up to the barges are just blocking any contact I have with anyone outside of this environment. But it was after taking time away, after spending at least a year or so, that's when it started to dawn on me that this is top down. Right. And I think one of the first moments where I got a glimpse of that, but then tried to, like, it was almost like a glitch in the Matrix, like, oh, is that a black cat twice? Right. Deja vu. But it didn't really hit me until after I left. But like, something that kind of peeked through like the outside world trying to pry the curtain back was Prudential Center and going through that experience at conference. And so my analysis of it was, oh, okay, once we get back to the Sunday to Sunday, this will all be okay. It's this whole, like, it's Australia, it's global, whatever. But then, like, looking back, I'm like, what the fuck, Nate? It's Australia. They're replicating this shit everywhere. Therefore, if it starts there, they're sending it to New York, they're sending it to LA, they're sending it to Phoenix. It's happening everywhere. It's not just like, oh, it's Australia, that's isolated. No, because Australia is giving birth to these problems.
And unpacking conference, Nate, what was the thing that, I asked you, what was your eye-opening moment? And you said conference to me when we were talking about this. What was it about conference that was like, ugh, I can't.
There were people there who, I don't want to say showed their true colors, because I think that might be unfair, because some of the people who I had the hardest time with were other volunteers who were clawing for leadership, who were vying for positions. And so they had kind of, I think, they had drunk the Kool-Aid and hadn't, I don't want to say it is entirely their fault, but they were certainly actors, and they wanted power and authority. But one of the circumstances, and I think I mentioned this on our episode with Lizeth, was that during conference, we have the different credentials, and I saw the hierarchies. That's when it became stark, because you had a whole, like, 200 some odd volunteers who were getting stuck with peanut butter and jelly, ham sandwiches or whatever. And I'm standing in this buffet line, like, got bacon, got eggs, got like hot coffee, and I'm like,
and you don't even know what's above you. Like, that's what you're getting. But wait until you see what's behind another secret door of upper people.
and I remember the reaction after I misplaced my credential, because I had access to that area. Like, God forbid somebody finds my credential and
gets behind that curtain and sees what's going on, that they have peanut butter and jelly and you are getting the good stuff.
As if anybody even knew. Like, they were all color coded to keep it all secret or whatever, so you didn't know what, like, black meant versus white versus purple. No one knew what these things meant. So, like, was somebody, like, was a volunteer with a purple sticker gonna, like, pick up my black sticker credential or whatever, and be like, ooh, let me see what doors this opens.
Right. Is that bacon?
Wow.
But yeah, I think that was when it first, because the reaction I got was intense. It was so bad that, and from the person that I reported to directly, that her oversight had to take her aside and basically say, like, this is not a good look. You can't talk to people like this. And
but
then
she reamed you out for losing your
and
card.
then moved me to another direct report or supervisor. So that was that. And I kept thinking, after all of that went down, that's when my mindset kind of turned into, I'm here to protect those, because I had teams that were reporting to me. I'm going to protect my team members from the toxicity that's happening directly above me.
I feel like I keep hearing that exact same story from anyone who is, even people who are still at Hillsong. Like, I hear that I'm here to be a buffer. And I remember doing that. I wasn't in Hillsong. I was in my own evangelical church. But I remember having that when I noticed things were off, having that same mentality that it couldn't leave, because be the change is what we're told, right? Be the change you want to see. And if you want things to get better, then you need to be the one acting that way. But, like, that's impossible to do if your top people don't, like, You know, you can't change everyone above you, even if you're trying to make it a good environment. Janice, were you feeling like you needed to protect people? Did you also have that stick around for? Yeah.
Absolutely. With my stage managing team and then with my Connect group. And so, like, part of the reason I was finally free to seriously consider leaving was I had stopped taking new people into my Connect group. And, you know, people were going to school, getting married, or just moving away. And it's like, okay, my core group is kind of dissipating.
The people that you had been building into and really like mentoring were leaving. So
they were leaving, so they were going to be fine. They didn't need my protection anymore, and I wasn't taking any more new people in. So I was like, okay.
That was helpful to you in terms of letting go.
Yeah. Because I was like, oh, I can't start this cycle again. And then, have to stay for more people.
Yeah.
What was for you, Janice, the point where you're like, I think this might be the point of no return, or was it a little series of chipping away? Like,
it was definitely a series, and just kept going. And so for me, I mean, the issues that ultimately took me out were race and gender, and just being like, as finally realized, like, as a Black woman, like, oh, this is not healthy for me, like this space. And what it's doing to me, what it says to me as a Black woman. I remember seeing some kids playing outside, little Black kids, well, biracial kids, and brother and sister, and the brother had like knocked his sister's hat off, whatever. So I was just making a joke, and I was like, like, hey man, like you never mess with a Black woman's hair, like, you know. And the little girl, she's like, I'm not Black. Like, I'm brown. I'm not Black. I'm brown. And I was like, okay, this is nothing that like Hillsong specifically is doing, but there's nothing at Hillsong that is like refuting that. Yeah. And it was just like, I would never want to raise a child in this. And if I wouldn't want to raise somebody in this environment, like, what am I doing here?
What are you still doing here? Yeah. And it feels like some of the, like, when I think of how, like, I've been listening to your episodes, and it's God Is Not Given as the podcast that deals with a lot of Hillsong stuff, which is, it's been great to listen to. It's an excellent resource. I think I was never a part of Hillsong, but even if you weren't, I think it's good commentary on evangelical culture. Like, I think a lot of the Hillsong issues are things other people can definitely look at and introspect and go, yeah, we had these things too that were going on. So like, as I was listening to the different stories that you were telling, you know, a lot of that stuff was popping up, things. So that's why in the documentary, I was like, oh, I'm sad with knowing that was such a big piece of your story that they didn't touch on race at all. But I realized that it's a harder story to tell. Like, you unpack it in a lot of episodes, but it's subtle. Like, you know, you gave an example, and there's something that you said that stuck with me when I was listening to one of your stories. It was like, you were interviewing someone, and I think you and your guest were like, we could have been friends, like, before at Hillsong. And then you had that moment of, no, we couldn't have been friends at Hillsong. One, you guys, I mean, I've heard from so many people, nobody got to make friends at Hillsong, at least not too deep, because y'all were really busy, like, you know, working jobs and then working Hillsong for free at the same time, trying to make ends meet. Like, it was hard to have the time, really. Even serving together wasn't really getting to know each other. And so much busyness, so much. And then the comment that you made was like, if there, or I forget who said it, and the two of you, but it was like, if there's one Black woman on stage, the other one can't be on stage. It's like your token Black person. So then you guys see each other as competition, and which was that's something as a white person, I guess I wouldn't have never noticed, or it would be oblivious to me, right, if I was in that environment. And it's not a racism thing where you can be like, haha, look what the pastor said and did, see, this is racism. It's something that you pick up when you watch how it affects everyone and impacts. And like, I feel like racism is one of those trickier things because it is through the impact. It is through, like, there was another comment about how there was never any couples that were involved in leadership where it was two Black men and women together. Like, there was no Black couples. It was like one person was Black who was in leadership, but they had a white or non-Black partner. And it was like, why? You're asking the question, like, why is this all of the people in leadership? Like, why is there? And like, you know, you could just write that off as a coincidence or whatever. But if you think a little bit harder on it, it's a sort of, it almost, like,
that's a thing. Yeah. That's a thing. And it's like, though, like you said, these things are so subtle. Like, you bring it up And then it's so easy to people, oh, you don't like interracial relationships? No, that's not the point.
That's not what that is.
That's
No.
that's not what this is about. But it's, how do you quantify something like that? Like, how do you put that in a report and say this is problematic? And especially when they're turning it back on you all the time, like in all these conversations with Carl, it's not us. It's not us. We're just doing what God directs. These are the people that God is choosing.
This is the way the Lord is leading things.
Yeah, we're just
God is
following
always
God.
picking the white guys who all look exactly like you. It's just God. It just functions this way. It's
we
this whole
don't
setup.
get it either. Carl, I'd like to change it too, but like,
I don't know why God thinks this way. He has a fixation on these kind of guys. It's a little bit weird. Oh, man.
So let's just keep praying about it, and keep.
So you had Carl's ear somewhat, like you've known him since the beginning of Hillsong, and you guys chatted, you had conversations together. Did you ever pull him into those meetings and are like, hey, we need to discuss the topic of Black people or women at Hillsong as a whole, and we need to sit down and have a conversation about this?
Oh, like we had, there were meetings. The black meeting.
The black meeting?
Yeah, there was the gay meeting. I think that was in 2015.
Okay.
And then in 2016, yeah, we had the black meeting.
Wait, it just feels wrong because, knowing Hillsong, it all feels wrong. But like,
I wouldn't want to be in the gay meeting if I was a gay person, because
know,
now
right?
they know who I am. And
well, the gay meeting, how did I end up there? So there was this whole thing with Josh, who was on Survivor.
Oh yeah.
And then the
Josh
media
Canfield.
picked up on that, and they're like, oh, Hillsong has this gay choir director, which like in Hillsong, like that's not even a thing.
Yeah.
This isn't like his position, what he's doing it's not that big a deal.
Right.
So, and Josh was obviously out, like.
But to be clear, Hillsong was never announcing itself to be affirming, right? Like
Right.
it was never
No,
took an
but
affirming
like
position.
Josh was out, and they were letting Josh still do things. And so then this blog comes out, and then Brian Houston, for whatever reason, just like decides to respond to it, and then he turns it and says, oh, like, we didn't know, the leadership didn't know, and kind of put it on Josh as if he, had hidden this thing, and now the church is having to deal with it. So as Josh's friend, that's how I ended up at the meeting. He was like, hey, we're going to have this meeting and talk about all this because people are upset. People want some clarity.
Well. This didn't...
Right. So even in the meeting, I remember Carl making a joke because it was me, Mary Jones. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying she was there. And Carl made a joke because we were the only women there. He's like, oh, like, we have this meeting. We, forget to invite any lesbians. So it was just all guys.
Women all the way around are forgotten. Women of color, gay women, all the women, just invisible.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were only there because like Josh was our friend and had invited us, hey, come, see what this is all about. And it was just basically like now to look back on it, like it was just, so much just gaslighting and just always trying to tamp people down, right? Well, here's, Carl and Joel, well, here's what Hillsong believes. They never really said what they believe, but this is the line we have to toe. But again, we're praying and hoping for things to change, and we hope you guys will stay and help us be the change, right?
It's interesting hearing that phrase because, we're like, they don't really provide room for any kind of change, right. But they give you morsels because they're constantly passing the buck. So whoever was actually responsible for this will never know because the people who are responsible are constantly diverting our attention somewhere else. If it's not Carl, it's Brian. If it's not Brian, it's Joel. If it's not Joel, it's Laura. It's always being pushed away, and then they can easily tell whoever they're talking to that no, we need your voice because we need to hear from you so that then it can like work its way up, and then some nebulous person in between is going to translate the message that you give them to that but you're talking to the person in between. You're talking to that person.
Right.
And
who's
they know
supposed
what the
to be
issues are at the
change.
top, and they're not really
Right.
changing it, and they have the power to do so.
Yeah.
So the gay meeting, unsuccessful, clearly. The black meeting, I'm guessing, is...
So the black meeting was because, 2016 was just rough. And it was so much, it was Alton Sterling and then Philando Castile. And then the election cycle was happening. So the black meeting
Donald Trump got elected in 2016, right?
So it was just before that, because it was in like September, October.
It was coming.
But people were already, this is this leadership of this church, and a lot of y'all are showing your Republican asses right now. And like even Carl Lentz, like your parents are clearly very like people are saying a lot of things that indicate they are going to vote for this man. And
Sorry to fast forward. Trump was in a picture with which member? Was it Brian Houston?
Brian Houston?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He went to that White House.
He went to the White House.
Yeah, showing his support. Yeah, showing their Republican asses. Yeah, even though they don't even live in the States. Yep. I mean, that's deep, right? He's in Australia, and he's like, I need to come support Trump.
I need to come, I need to be there. So, and now I'm like, I guess, we were all getting kind of restless, and there was just this growing dissent, obviously.
Yeah.
So we had, I was Carl's Black Whisperer, right? So he was like, hey, we want to have this meeting, so give me a list of names, and we're gonna talk through stuff. And so I had my list, and I remember walking in, and there were people who was like, oh, these are not the people on my list. So Carl has his list, so he has his team
invited from
right.
Oh my god,
he has his team.
He has his list. I mean, we kind of get a sense of what,
and I'm sure you can guess who was on that list.
Yeah.
So he has his team. And I have mine. I remember thinking, oh God, like I hope people actually speak up. Like I hope, and people did. And there was a moment when, we're talking about, there's no diversity. Like we have all these people. We have this wealth of people who can speak, who can preach, who can sing, who can do all these things. And they're not making it, to the platform. And Carl's like, well, I don't want to just, be throwing people up there, as tokens. I think that would be insulting to you guys. No, we're telling you it wouldn't be, but okay, you've decided, whatever. I just wanted to be organic. And I remember we had a Black civil rights attorney guy, and he said, well, it can't be organic. Like slavery wasn't organic,
right?
Like that it was intentional, and you can't.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're picking Black people from outside Hillsong on the street and be like, "Hey, we want to bring you in. We don't know you, but like we need Black people, so we're going to tokenize you." We're talking about the church is full of people who are capable, who are Black. Like, there's no need to tokenize because this is your group. This is your people.
These are
it's not going to happen.
We're putting the work in. And I saw in a moment, I was like, no, I saw that light come on. And I know Carl, he got it in that moment. Like, I know that he understood, which probably annoyed him. And so for the next...
Did you have hope at that point? You're like, okay, he got it. He got the message. He's going to be convicted. Like, clearly he's going to care enough. Seeing it clearly.
So I think he's seen it. And for the next 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks... there were Black people doing the offering messages. And then it just,
the offering messages
kind of tapered off. And even for that, like there had to be, not everyone got picked. A few of us got picked. And then we had to go to like this special Saturday class where he's teaching us.
Oh
whatever.
My gosh.
Like, meanwhile, I'm writing Josh Kimes' sermons. Yeah. But
okay, we talked about, we're jumping, but you were doing a lot at Hillsong. Like you were stage managing, but you were ghostwriting the sermons for one of the pastors, not getting paid, no name attached to this, no recognition. Right. They would never put you up on stage to preach it, even though you're capable enough to write it and for it to be spoken out of his mouth. But it needs to be out of a different face than yours. Someone that looks more like Carl Lentz to actually impact the people, because that's God's favorite.
That's for God's mysterious reasons, right?
And you're running connect groups, so you're doing a lot of stuff in the church. Okay, all right. I'm trying to like get the picture of all this stuff that's happening, and you're hoping there might be change, and then there's people doing the offerings, and nothing is really.
And then it just kind of stopped. And I mean, I had already been on the fence kind of, I think from maybe late 2015, I would have times where I would just be like, oh, okay, I'm tired. I don't want to go to church. So I just wouldn't go for a couple of weeks, but then I would miss it and I would go back. And so in 2016, probably had a few of those phases. And then at the beginning of 2017, kind of the same. And then February, Black History Month. And I remember we had been talking, okay, we're doing all this stuff, so we're going to have a big, Black History Month. Obviously, like, we're well ahead of it. We can talk about it. We can plan some things. People had given ideas, and then none of it, we just didn't do anything. So the last week of Black History Month, like that Friday, Carl calls me. He's like, hey, can you do some kind of poetry thing? Can we have, whatever. So Friday night, so then I write this thing to perform on Sunday. So I do that, and then like never came back. So I went, and then I was just like tired.
That was your last time, and you're like, all right, this is exhausting. This is
I think maybe I went the next week. But like I was like, oh, all right, I'm just gonna take a couple weeks off. And I just never missed it. And so the next time I went was Mother's Day, because Mother's Day, so a woman's going to be speaking.
A woman could finally speak at church. Oh my gosh. Okay, when you were talking about, I got to cut this in really quick because my brain forgets things and then I remember it after. But when you were talking about the meeting to help prepare, I guess, Black people to speak, which is hilarious because I bet you white people spouted off nonsense all the time and were never trained for that garbage and they just throw whoever, right? Like that's how it goes. But then all of a sudden, oh, you guys are now going to be participating. Let's have a group meeting to. It just flashed back when you talked about women speaking for Mother's Day. I grew up in a lot of patriarchal churches. And the last one, evangelical patriarchal church I was in, they finally made an announcement that women are going to be able to speak in the communion service, like get up and share a word. And what was funny is I remember like sitting through listening to like kids practically talking that were because they were male and they were like rambling, or old men. It didn't really matter the age. Some people were like rambling off topic. I didn't even know where they were going, where the plane was going to land. It had nothing to do with communion, like the resurrection or any of the stuff that was supposed to be centered on this service. It was just, they were just happy to have people listening to them. And this was the service where people could share a word, from scripture or whatever. And they finally decided the male leadership at the top was never going to go away. The preaching was always going to be male-led. But they were going to give this carrot to women where they could finally share a word in the breaking of bread communion service. And before they did that, they needed to send out a pamphlet explaining in detail what kinds of sharing this is about and how to go about expressing your thoughts during the breaking. And I just remember reading that and being like, you could have done this for the guys that have been sharing over the last, I think they needed to understand what this service was about. But now that you have women coming in to speak, you need to let them know, this is not teaching, because women are not allowed to teach. This is sharing your heart, but it has to be relevant to the word. And like all the stuff that was in there. And then they even took, I don't think I've ever taken this much time to talk about my old church. I'm usually quiet. But like they even took the time to be like, explaining their previous position more than they even did their new one, to explain why women weren't allowed before up till now. And it was like, if you're really going to celebrate that women are making these progress forward, maybe don't take more time to like express why you used to do it the other way and what that position was, because you're moving forward, right? But it was like just that hesitation to, anyway, when you're talking about this meeting for like helping people to know how to go, I was just like, I remember that insulting feeling of reading through that paper and being like, oh, now we're explaining how this needs to be done, as if these guys were ever, doing this before. Like, it's, that's that sting. Sorry, I know I cut in and you were saying like that Mother's Day was women speaking.
Mother's Day, just... I was like, my friend is going to speak, so I'll go. And that was my first time back, and I was like, oh yeah, I do not miss this. And that was when I decided, okay, I'm going to leave. But I didn't want to, because everybody just gets burnt out and leaves quietly and they don't say anything. Yeah. And then Hillsong gets to say, well, nobody ever said anything and we didn't know. We didn't know these issues existed. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to... So
you decided to be a troublemaker. Rebellious.
I was like, I'm going to say that I'm leaving and I'm going to tell you why, Carl Lentz. I want to,
invite him to a meeting and sit him down?
So
invite
I tried.
him out for coffee. Invite him out for turn these tables around. We need to go for a coffee, girl. Did he? So I tried.
I'm like, hey, can we meet up? And he just would not. would not, like, he kept trying to, like, provoke. I was like, I don't want to do this over text. Like,
he wanted to know ahead of time sort of what the, I hate when they do that. Like, it's such a
I mean,
common...
and he knew what it was, because we had
knew.
some conversations before.
But he's hoping to get it out of the way through text or email and not have to look you in the face and have the discussion.
Right. Which now I'm like, these people are such cowards. Like, you can't. I've put years in here. And if you thought you were going to come out on top of this, you would have met me in person, no problem. But like, you're not going to win this one, so you just won't do it. So he never did. So yeah, it was like through May through July, he just kept avoiding it, wouldn't meet with me. So then I finally was like, oh well, forget it. My cat died. And then I was like, well, he's going to know I'm having a hard time with that. So he's going to be awful either way, but he won't be as awful. So let me just go on and slip this in now too. So also, I'm leaving. And here's why. So I had my exit interview with Toulouse. But both of them, she relayed the message and they're like, basically just not taking me seriously. You'll be back. You're not going to find... They told
you you'd be back? You're not going to find what you're looking for out there? I feel like people do that. When people leave church, they're like, oh, you're never going to find what you're looking for. Like that kind of a message of like, we're the source of all good things you could possibly want. And, you're just a complainer. You're whatever it is that you have a beef with, it's not legit. Right. Like it's that gaslighting.
Well, they said all this stuff, all this race stuff, all this gender stuff, like we're doing better than anyone else on this stuff.
Wow.
They really believed that about themselves.
Meanwhile, hang on, women could not, if I'm not mistaken, if there was a male guitarist on stage, this part, a woman could not also have her guitar in hand on stage and play if there was a male guitarist at Hillsong, right?
Yeah.
Like,
except Izzy, right? Izzy was like the only one.
Yeah.
I think there was like someone else.
Izzy and Heather before her.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I think it was one of the twins that was told that they couldn't bring their guitar anymore or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, we're doing so good with women. Look at that. Like
we're doing the best, not just good, the best.
Oh,
you're not going to find better out there. And you came from a
else.
Church where you had women preachers before this. Like
right.
this is a step down from what you're used to,
right?
In that area.
But
it's just an arrogance of like we're so amazing and we're.
Yeah. So you'll be back.
I actually told myself that as I was walking away. I told my team lead, I need a break. I'm doing a lot of stuff. I started coaching hockey. I started a bunch of other little side projects, and I'm like, I got too much on my plate. So I'm going to back away. And I initially thought that I would come back in at some point with like a totally different, like a more manageable schedule. But it's funny how when you step away from it all, it suddenly like your brain is able to deprogram.
Oh man.
But I mean, like the schedule was insane. Every night of the week you were doing something, right? Like
to look at it now, I'm like, oh my God, that's so strategic and that's such cold behavior. Like, like if you had just taken a break and had nothing to fill it, but it's like, oh no, you're doing other things and like meeting other people and like engaging your brain in other ways. And you're like, oh, like you have something to compare it to.
Right.
And the mind just starts to deprogram. It's like
some of your guests were on your podcast, Janice, were talking about having friends outside of church, and those were wake up moments of seeing like how these relationships were better and healthier than what you could do inside of Hillsong when you're all worked so hard, right? And people aren't really getting to know you, and it's that sort of a vibe. I know when the pandemic started, like I was telling Nate, I am so excited that churches are being forced to close. I know there are places, the worst places all over the place that are like, keep going and pretending the pandemic wasn't real. Like they didn't get a break from brainwashing because
Mark Driscoll.
I mean, these things like, there's a lot of really like out there wild churches that are living in some conspiracy theory land that I don't even know how anyone can reach through to that. Like I can't even imagine how to start those conversations with anyone over on that that far end. But like for the ones who were acting like they cared about it or maybe did care about it, who were in churches where, you know, they're in places where they shut down, I was so excited because I know for myself it took a year out of church before like things started to really like come into the clear for me in terms of what was going on. And, you know, the excuses that I made up for things became like things just started to fall away. The scale started to fall with time out. Yeah. And I just, in my heart, this is before the pandemic, I was like, I wish everyone had to take a sabbatical from church because then they could get a sense of what's brainwashing and what's not. Like every week you're going in and the music's communicating something to you and the messages are like, there's a constant barrage. And if you're there multiple times a week, you don't leave space for those other, even to consider what those messages that they might be off. And for me, I was like, that was a way, and the pandemic was not my situation. It was before that. But when the pandemic hit, I was like, this is going to help so many people to force a forced break that the pastors are not going to be happy about. I mean, I saw so many of them writing about the need to go online for sermons because, you know, that fear of like, how are we going to get this message across constantly into their ears so that they could stay? And I don't think it was super successful in a lot of places to keep people I think a lot of deconstruction has begun with the pandemic that wasn't happening before because people had a forced break and had to, I would love to do an episode on just all the people who left over the pandemic and how that caused them to start thinking. And like so much was going down at the time too, that in society while the pandemic was happening to make people have to question, like, how's my pastor responding to Black Lives Matter? You know, like even if it's an online sermon, how are they addressing any of this? Or are they just skipping over the entire, like, I feel like a lot of people started deconstructing. I know I listened to the first episode of your podcast. I want to get into this. A teaser. You quoted a tweet from Brian Houston, who was basically making fun of people who are walking away from church and saying that. And I posted it on my page today and I was like, oh, looking back at this hasn't aged well at all from Brian. Because he's talking about if your faith is going to be viable and if it's going to be strong, then these people clearly didn't have a strong faith. And you look at him and you're like, well, are you the benchmark, Brian? Like, you're deciding these people who walked away are inferior Christians, but your faith is the one we should be. And we see all the stuff that, you know, clearly has come out since. And so you started your podcast on that note and talking about your own faith journey of having to re-examine. And I wondered if you would share the title of your podcast and how that tied into what you were doing, because I thought it was really interesting and tied into a lot of the topic of deconstruction as a whole.
Yeah. So the title of my podcast is God is Not Given. And it came from that verse, you know, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of a sound mind. And for at least a year, maybe more than that, like I just had this thought in the back of my head. It's like, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but I got this from somewhere. Like, because I was like, no, so much of my life and so much of my faith is actually just really fear-based. Like, it's not about really leaning into anything. It's like staying away from things. And this is what I don't believe in and what I don't like. And here's what I'm not doing. And here's the reasons I'm afraid to do these things because of what might happen. Like, I was like, no, I just feel like that's all I got given really was fear. Yeah. Like, no power, no love, no sound mind. Like, these are all the things that were like attacked. So I was just like, oh, well, I feel like basically at the end of the day, like God has not given me this religion, like this faith. I don't know what this is, but I don't think this is, if God, and at that point, I still really, really believed in God and wanted to believe in the Christian God, like wanted to believe, no, if God is all loving, all powerful, all knowing, I can believe that, but then I'm not seeing that here. And so it can't be. It can't be this.
I liked something you'd said about how the math didn't add up. And I was like, that's, you know, if it is this and this and this, how come it's just not working. It's not at all.
It's not working.
It's interesting to say that, you know, our faith is not based on fear when the crux of it is that you're going to spend eternity roasting in fiery torment unless you believe X, Y, and Z.
And everyone who doesn't believe what you do is gonna
right. So how can you not build a religion, a belief system, a faith on fear? when your operative principle is saving people from a fiery torment that they need to be afraid of. I think there's really no way around it. If you really want to claim that your religion or your faith practice is all about love, you have to get rid of that belief in hell. That has to go. But then the crazy thing is, once that goes, and this is how it worked for me. Once that goes, then
you can explore everything, right?
But also,
you can ask the questions because you're not going to be burned in a fiery pit forever.
Right.
You can ask the hard stuff.
Yeah. So for me, what ended up happening from there was the idea of who Jesus was started to unravel. Because if he didn't die on the cross to save me from a fiery torment, then what was the whole purpose of this? And I think for me, where I've landed is his teachings, which ironically enough is not what most evangelical Christians actually adhere to. They don't follow his teachings.
He doesn't talk about gay people anywhere, nothing about abortion. Like all the favorite topics are just nowhere to be found in Jesus' lips. Like they're just not.
And he doesn't talk about the things that, like you were saying, Gail, the things that evangelicals love to talk about, but also a lot of their pet theologies and beliefs about God, those aren't really talked about by Jesus either. They're talked about by Paul to a degree, but often that's like misreadings of what Paul was possibly saying. Some of it is misattributed because we don't really know if Paul wrote those things.
Oh my gosh. Then start to study how the Bible came together and what got left out and which people were included in making those decisions. But it's all the Holy Spirit guiding everything. Yeah. We just can't question or look. Don't. I feel like once you start looking into the original languages or history or realizing that the Jewish people don't believe in hell, and that's like, that was, you'd think if that was a part of the whole thing, they would have known that before Christianity came along, and like they would.
Very important. It's very, very important.
Important piece of teaching in history to know that was, you start studying all this stuff, and it's like everything starts to pull apart. It's a scary process. Like you have a phrase that you've said a lot on your podcast. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to about deconstruction on how you've said it, Janice, but do you know where I'm going with that?
Is it that I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I wish it for everyone?
Yeah. I've heard you say that a few times, and I was like, that's very well said, because it is it's a courageous journey. Like, I think that was the part of the insulting part of Brian Houston's comment. I was like, wow, like anyone who decides to walk away from all this fear, it is a hard, difficult untangling. It's a sincere process. It shakes the way you see everything. It starts to, I found it interesting. I was listening to the beginning of your podcast, which I think you started it at a very interesting time because it was right before Carl Lentz scandal came out. And like you had planned an episode with someone and you bumped it because you were like, okay, this just happened. I feel like that was predictive of like the recent stuff. It's just like, you're going to do XYZ, but it's Hillsong. There's going to be some new scandal popping up that you're going to have to bump everything to address. Like it's going to be
they never consult my schedule.
Yeah, right. One of my old coworkers, she sent me a text. She didn't go to Hillsong or anything, but she knew that was what I had escaped from, and so she sent me a text today. She's like, "Hey, did you see 5 a.m. this morning, New York Times?" I'm like, "Well, got to read another Hillsong article."
There's always something new going on. We thought we were just going to sit down and watch with our friends the Hillsong expose, the 3-hour-long one that you were in, and then there was the Brian. Like, there's always some new craziness going on with Hillsong. Yeah. But like, so I look at how your podcast started and some of the things you believed, said, spoke about, even with regard to Carl Lentz, of like, he was one of the most genuine people you'd known and a friend. And then I listened, like, and that was like a year and a half. I think you're a year and a half into that podcast. And then like I listened now, and I'm like, in terms of just views shifting, and you're like, a lot can happen in a year and a half of being out and analyzing, and right?
Absolutely.
Like you're in the documentary, you called him a narcissist straight up. Like that was that was like quoted from you. But like like when you started your podcast, when the news about Carl broke, you didn't even know the details, and you were like, I have empathy. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. You know?
And I still have empathy for him. Because I do think, is he a villain? Absolutely. Is he a victim? Absolutely. Is he more villain than victim? Yes. And I think maybe at the beginning I was maybe giving him like 50-50. And now I'd be like, you're a grown ass man, so I'm going to make it 90-10. Like, yes, you were very much victimized by the system. You were created by the system, but then you you became it. Because even with Brian with that tweet, I'm like, I mean, at this point, I like it's evil to me because I'm like, you're talking about people who've deconstructed, and I think you've deconstructed. Like, I don't think you guys really believe this stuff. Like, you can't believe in the hell that you're trying to sell people and behave the way that you do. Like, we were kept in check because we believe this stuff, right? Like, it kept us from doing things, and you guys are out here wilding. Like, you're doing all the things. You can't believe in this.
You start to learn all the different stuff that behind what's going on, and it's like, I can't view you in that same give you that all that benefit of the doubt that I started with after watching this and this and this and this happen in front of me.
Yeah. I remember when it first broke, I think I was thinking along the same lines, because there were these narratives that were kind of tossed around while I was at Hillsong, and you probably heard them as well, that like, oh, Carl's a bit of the black sheep, and Brian's afraid of his popularity, which might have been true, but I think it was
sounds like they all had very similar.
It's both and. I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I think there's much more insidious. It's a much more insidious nature than how we kind of perceived it while we were there, because we were looking at everything through rose-colored glasses, and some of that hadn't quite come off. Even though I had been out of evangelicalism for 3 years at this point, when the Carl Lentz stuff broke, I wanted to believe that somebody on the inside was out to get him,
rather than believing there was something really off about him and his behavior.
Right.
And can I just add, his personality was such that people just felt the warm fuzzies for him. Is that accurate? Like, I didn't have interactions with him, but he made people feel very comfortable around him.
Yeah. I remember one Sunday, going up there to the green room. He had come in, and my the service producer lead was, I guess, on vacation, so I was the one that was rostered, and he made a surprise visit to Montclair, and so I'm like, all right, I'm the one that's on, and they're like, well, the service producer has to be in the room with Carl, but had all these instructions suddenly. I'm like, how is Carl? Like, I really was like, how is Carl any different from Matt or Josh or Kane, any of these guys? Why is it that, like, I can be in a room with them, but I have to go through this whole checklist thing to be in a room with Carl? Like, what is this? And then getting into that room, and sitting in that meeting, going through it, and feeling nervous because, oh, now I'm talking to Carl. And then him kind of acting totally different from what I expected. And him being like, knowing which was a bit like, the fact that I was all excited that my pastor knew who I was.
Yikes.
He remembered
I met
my
a
name.
Celebrity was my pastor. He's the one who saw me.
He remembered my name. And of course, he knows my brother, because he's dragging my brother up on stage. He's like, I want that singer all the time. But anyway, but like, then it's sort of, he created that personality of like, oh no, Carl actually is approachable. And the ones who are creating that distance between Carl and us lowly volunteers were, the drivers or the security, and I think it was Luke that was always like floating around him, that would be creating some of these distances. And that's how I perceived it the whole time I was there. When now, having spent a few years out, and even when the news dropped in 2020, that perception of him still sort of existed in my brain. And then taking some time to sort of look at, take a step back, look at the culture, look how this is replicating itself. It comes from the top down. He's doing this on purpose. He's creating a personality that makes himself lovely to people, but he's also telling his team to do these things to keep people at a distance. This is how it all.
And I think in abusive cultures, this is like, when we do this podcast and we cover all these different churches, one of the things that we want to people to realize is look for it in your own. Like these are common tactics, right? Like these are so the people going, I know my pastor. He's he's the nicest guy ever. Like, how many stories of abusive people they have charismatic personalities. They feel like the most warmest, lovingest, feeling someone is trustworthy is not evidence that they are trustworthy. That is often a characteristic of a narcissist. I'm not saying every nice person they're a narcissist, but like that, it is hard to tell. It is so if you get deceived by your pastor, like I hate to say, don't feel stupid for it, because everyone does, but it really is not you. Like this is how they project themselves. It is normal that's how this works so effectively. Like they give off those approachable, loving, I care about you, I want to listen to what you have to say, you matter to me, you're so important to me. And then like, oh, it's this person that's really the problem. Right. But they've surrounded themselves by all those people to do their work for them.
Janice continues her story on the next episode of the Full Mutuality podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And if you don't already have one, head over to our website, fullmutuality.com, for a list of all the apps you can find us on.
We couldn't do this without you, our listeners, so thank you so much for your continued support. Speaking of support, one of the best things you can do for us is to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.
I'm pretty sure 5-star reviews get you an extra crown in heaven.
But seriously, if you found this episode insightful, spread the word and share it with your friends.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Full Mutuality. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality podcast.